Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about date slicers in Power BI. Let's first understand what slicers and how they are going to be helpful to us. Slicers are a great way to add report level filters to Power BI. So it is something like if I have created a report in Power BI and I add a date slicer there specifically because right now I'm talking about date slicers. So I'm going to add a date slicer in that report. And what will happen is instead of my report being fixed to the entire number of multiple years in my data set, it is going to give the end user the flexibility to select the date range that he wants or she wants and to do the analysis on between those range only. So it is something like a filter that is controlling your visualization, and the user is also getting the flexibility to interact with that. Once you have added a slicer in one of the reports, all the subsequent sheets that you have, you can bring that same slicer to the multiple sheets where you want to use that same slicer through an option that we call as sync slicer in Power BI. So this side on the right side, you can see I have added a slicer to one of my Power BI reports, and I'm just filtering out the dates that are specified here, and I'm not looking into the entire 4-year data that I have. This is only showing me the visualization between those two dates that are specified in the slicer. Now let's go ahead to Power BI and see how slicers work in Power BI. This is my sales report per region, and I want to remove the slicer and redo it for you. So as you can see, this is the value that we can see without a slicer. This is rather the total sales that we are getting from West, East, Central, and South for the 4-year data that I have. Now to add a slicer, we have a slicer icon over here in our visualization. I can just click on that. And because I'm going to create a date slicer right now, I'm going to take my order date and drop it in my slicer container. Instantly, you will see this has started showing me the minimum to the maximum of the order date that I have. Now, I have added a slicer that is talking between those two dates. If you're fine with that, it's okay. But what if I want the slicer to start from a particular range? Rather, I want to give the user the flexibility to select the starting point of the visualization, the starting point of the dates from where, before after a particular date. So I can just go ahead and make it a before or an after. So if I click on before and I select any particular date, it is going to give me all the data that is before a particular date that is mentioned here, right? And I'm not getting anything that is after this particular date. Accordingly, I have an after option that is going to give me everything that is after the specified date over here to the last point that is there in my data. So this is not the live data for me. It is not giving me the data that is till date. It stopped somewhere in the last 2018. So it's going to only give me data till there. The other options that we have is list, drop down, and relative to. List is something that will give me a selection of multiple days that are there in my data, and I can pick up anything that I want over here from here. Same goes with my drop down. Instead of seeing my entire list, I can see it as a drop down and select the particular date that I want to analyze my report on. So on 7th January 2015, we were only doing sales in Central, and this was the total amount of sales. Then we have East, we have South and West on January 6, 2015. And as we go on selecting the multiple dates here, we come to know the sales that we are doing per region on that particular day. For me right now, what works fine is between. So I'm going to leave my date filter to between, and then you can go to your format option that you see over here, and you can quickly do the formatting of this. Now, I don't need the slicer header, so I can remove that. And the date inputs that I have, I'm going to just change the font so that, you know, it looks a little better for me. So maybe I can just make it, this is fine, and I'm going to increase the font so that it looks a little better. And if you want, you can even give it a background so that, you know, it stands a little prominent there. And also there's one more thing that I would want to do is maybe add borders so that it looks quite nice on the sheet. Now, as you can see, I have added a between slicer, so I can select any start date and end date, and you can see my visualization changing. Now, I have few more sheets over here, and I want this slicer to get added to my selected sheets. As in, I have a sheet that is showing me sales per state. So I need this slicer in my sales per state, and also in my dates in Power BI, the sheet I have used for another video, but I want that same slicer over here. Then once I have added the slicer in one of the sheets, we can go to view, and here you have option of sync slicer. When you click on this, just next to your visualization, you get an option of syncing your slicer to particular reports that you have. I'm going to just bring this to I have an option of sync slicer, and all right. And when you're trying to sync the slicer, make sure that your slicer that you have on the sheet is selected, because if your slicer is not selected, then somehow you'll not be able to sync your slicer. So when my slicer is selected, I click on sync slicer from the view tab that we have, and I get the list of the pages that I have created. And this gives me an option of just syncing my slicer and syncing the slicer along with the slicer being visible on a particular sheet. If I do not select this option of being visible on a particular sheet, then my sales per state will get affected by the slicer that I have, but it is not going to show me the date range that is being selected in my regional sales sheet. So just be sure how do you want your slicer to appear, and then if I just make sure that it is just selected, we can just click on OK, and here you can see the slicer is over here on present on both the sheets. So that's how you use slicers in Power BI. Thank you.